The scent of fresh flowers mixed with a stench of cow manure as I stood there, stunned, watching my peaceful farm transform into a five-star wedding circus overnight. White tents, catering trucks, hundreds of guests, all arranged by Pamela Griggs, HOA president and self-declared queen of Crescent Ridge. She thought she could walk all over me. But what happens when the landowner fights back and unleashes an army she never saw coming? I rubbed my eyes once, twice, hoping I was hallucinating. Nope, the chaos was real. My backyard, my sanctuary, had been hijacked by complete strangers dressed like a Hallmark movie exploded. Rows of pristine white chairs lined my favorite pasture. A towering floral arch, probably costing more than my monthly mortgage, swayed dangerously close to my prized vegetable patch. A band of violinists perched near the old oak tree played something fancy that sounded way too delicate for the cattle watching them from across the fence. And right at the center of it all, barking orders like she was royalty, stood Pamela Griggs, clipboard in hand, pearls around her neck, and the same smug expression she wore every time she fined my neighbor for daring to paint their mailbox eggshell white instead of approved HOA beige. I stalked toward the chaos, boots crunching over my gravel driveway, or at least what used to be my driveway. Now it was jammed with delivery trucks, a stretch limo, and about 40 sedans haphazardly parked like a drunken parade. Pamela caught sight of me and flashed a smile so fake it could have been printed at Kinko's. "Oh, Mason, darling," she called, waving her clipboard like a wand. "Isn't it just breathtaking? The whole community will be so grateful you're hosting this magical event." I stopped dead in my tracks, staring at her like she'd just suggested I donate a kidney to her poodle. "My land," I said slowly, "is not a community park." Pamela laughed, an airy, dismissive trill that sent my blood pressure skyrocketing. "Don't be dramatic. It's just one little wedding. You weren't even using this space anyway." I glanced at the cows chewing cud nearby. General Snort, my prize bull, met my eyes and huffed a low, menacing grunt. Oh, I was using it all right. And so was he. My fists curled, my jaw clenched, my patience frayed like the edge of an old rope. They thought they could trespass, throw a wedding, party like it was their own land. They were wrong, because today, Crescent Ridge was about to experience the real farm life. And it was going to get messy. Pamela clapped her hands sharply, summoning a pair of frantic wedding planners who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. "Ladies, let's hustle. The bride will arrive any minute," she chirped, ignoring the furious man glaring daggers at her, namely, me. I planted myself in the middle of the makeshift aisle and crossed my arms. "Pamela, explain now." She let out a martyred sigh, as if I were the unreasonable one here. "Really, Mason, must you make such a scene? The venue fell through last minute. This is for the community. Everyone benefits when Crescent Ridge hosts prestigious events." I arched an eyebrow. "And when did Crescent Ridge vote to host anything in my backyard?" Before she could fabricate another lie, a gleaming white SUV pulled up, kicking up a cloud of dust that settled right over the buffet table. Out popped the bride and groom, Madison and Chad, if the massive glittering welcome banner was any clue. Madison, platinum blonde hair piled high, floated toward me in a billowing white dress that looked like it cost more than my truck. "Oh my gosh," she squealed, "you must be Mason. Thank you so much for lending us your gorgeous property. It's like so rustic chic." I stared at her. "I didn't lend you anything." Chad, sporting a three-piece designer suit and the smuggest smile west of the Mississippi, slung an arm around Madison's shoulders. "Come on, bro. Don't sweat it. We already paid the HOA his fortune. It's all squared away." Pamela beamed proudly, like a raccoon showing off a stolen sandwich. "See, it's all settled. And Mason, dear, you should feel honored. These two are very well connected. Madison's father is a big name in real estate." "Oh, good," I deadpanned. "Maybe he can buy you some common sense." Chad's smile faltered slightly. Madison's forehead wrinkled in confusion, but she was quickly distracted by a florist fussing over her train. I took a slow breath, scanning the sea of chairs, the catering trucks, the guests milling around with champagne flutes in my pasture, each one stomping over the land I'd spent years tending. No, this wasn't happening. "And one more thing," Pamela added sweetly, flipping through her ever-present clipboard. We had a little trouble with parking, so we used your driveway for the vendors and VIP guests. Hope that's okay. I spun around, and there it was, a parking lot from hell. My truck was completely trapped behind a line of SUVs, party buses, and one absurdly long stretch limo that looked like it had eaten 3 normal cars and stitched itself together in horror. Hope that's okay, I repeated, my voice dangerously low. Pamela didn't even blink. It's only for a few hours. Be a good neighbor, Mason. So I stared at her, at the happy couple, at the DJ setting up speakers on my front porch. And in that moment, something inside me snapped. If they wanted rustic farm charm, oh, they'd get it. All of it. I pulled out my phone, dialed Ray, and kept my voice low. Ray, open the south gate. There was a pause and then a low chuckle. I love it, boss. I glanced over at General Snort, who was pawing the ground ready for battle. Yeah, I said, a slow grin spreading across my face. All of it. Ray didn't need telling twice. Within minutes, the south gate creaked open and the cavalry arrived. The first sign of trouble was subtle. A ripple of unease ran through the violinists as low, thudding vibrations shook the ground beneath their feet. Then, one of the groomsmen dropped his mimosa, staring past the buffet with wide, horrified eyes. A split second later, they came. 40 head of cattle, 6 goats, a particularly aggressive turkey named Captain Cluckles, and General Snort, my ornery 800-pound bull, thundered through the open field like the opening act of the apocalypse. Guests screamed, chairs toppled like dominoes, the florist dropped her bouquet and fled. Madison let out a blood-curdling shriek as General Snort charged directly at the towering wedding cake, goring it like a matador's worst nightmare. Frosting exploded into the air, showering the nearest bridesmaids in vanilla-scented shrapnel. Chad tried to shield Madison, but ended up taking a face full of buttercream instead. The poor DJ, mid-seb, barely managed to dive out of the way as a goat little rascal launched itself onto the turntable, spinning like a caffeinated breakdancer. Pamela screeched from the sidelines, flapping her clipboard wildly like she could somehow command the chaos to stop. Someone get control of those beasts. I leaned casually against a fence post, chewing on a toothpick, watching it all unfold like the finest pay-per-view drama money could buy. Funny, I said to nobody in particular. They never caused trouble for me. Captain Cluckles, with perfect comic timing, strutted up to the head table and launched himself onto the roast beef platter, sending silverware clattering and a terrified server into a screaming retreat. Meanwhile, the goats discovered the gift table, and under a minute, 2 of them had shredded the decorative wrapping paper, one had chewed the corner off of Tiffany's box, and another was trotting proudly with the designer handbag dangling from its horns. The limo driver, poor soul, made the mistake of opening his door to flee. A trio of goats bounded inside, followed by a frantic guest wielding a centerpiece like a weapon. Pamela rounded on me, her face an alarming shade of beet red. You did this, she screeched. I widened my eyes innocently. Me? Lady, I didn't invite the cows. They're just enjoying the party. Pamela sputtered incoherently, pointing at the disaster all around us. The groom's mother fainted into a folding chair. The bridesmaids abandoned their shoes and sprinted for the catering tent. The best man got head-butted into the punch bowl. Amidst the chaos, Sergeant Honkers, my prize goose and chaos incarnate, entered the scene like a small feathery wrecking ball. With a furious squawk, he latched onto Chad's $3,000 0-cent suit pants and refused to let go. Chad spun in circles, flailing helplessly. Get it off! Get it off! While Madison, sobbing into what remained of her veil, tried to help, but only succeeded in tripping over a tipped-over chair, landing flat on her designer dress with a loud, very undignified squelch. I shook my head, letting out a low whistle. Nature, I said sagely, is a powerful thing. Pamela, trembling with rage, jabbed a finger toward me. I'm calling the police. I shrugged. Great idea. Let's get law enforcement's opinion on unauthorized weddings on private property. The look on Pamela's face was priceless. A cocktail of horror, fury, and dawning realization that she might have just stepped into a very deep, very messy legal cow pie. The cherry on top? General Snort, now bored with the ruined cake, wandered over to the floral arch and casually knocked it down with one lazy shove, sending the whole thing crashing into the reflecting pond with a magnificent splash of. The wedding was officially over, but for Pamela, the real nightmare was just beginning. Pamela jabbed frantically at her phone, her perfectly manicured fingers trembling with rage. "I'm calling the authorities," she screeched, practically spitting the words out. I tipped my hat back and gave her a lazy grin. "Awesome. Want me to get you a folding chair while you wait?" She ignored me, barking into her phone like a deranged auctioneer. Meanwhile, the chaos around us continued to spiral, guests tripping over loose hay bales, goats gnawing on tablecloths, and poor Captain Cluckles perched triumphantly atop the dessert cart, crowing his victory. 15 minutes later, 2 patrol cars rolled up, kicking up another layer of dust over what remained of the once pristine white chairs. A pair of officers stepped out, taking in the scene with matching expressions of, "What the actual heck is happening here?" One of them, Officer Daniels, a tall man with a sunburned nose and the permanent look of someone who regretted every life choice, approached cautiously. "Afternoon," he said, his eyes scanning from the destroyed buffet table to General Snort, who was now using the toppled wedding arch as a scratching post. Pamela practically sprinted toward him. "Officers, thank God you're here. Arrest him," she stabbed a finger toward me. "He sabotaged this wedding. He let wild animals loose on purpose." Officer Daniels blinked, then turned his slow gaze toward me. I raised a hand in greeting. "Howdy. And this is your property?" he asked. "Yup," I said, popping the P. Pamela shoved herself between us, waving her clipboard like it was some holy decree. "But he let animals ruin an official community event." Officer Daniels frowned slightly. "Ma'am, this is private property, correct?" Pamela floundered. "Well, yes, but technically, I interrupted. This land has never been part of the Crescent Ridge HOA. I've got the deed and property surveys if you want to see them." I pulled a neatly folded set of documents from my back pocket and handed them over with a grin. Officer Daniels glanced through them, then exchanged a look with his partner. The look cops give each other when they realize this call is about to get really stupid. "And you," Daniels turned to Pamela, his voice growing firmer, "organize an event here without permission?" Pamela's smile twitched. "It was for the good of the neighborhood." "Did you have the owner's consent?" the officer pressed. Pamela opened her mouth, then closed it. Opened it again. Nothing came out but a faint, strangled wheeze. Meanwhile, guests were hurriedly gathering their things, stepping over cow pies and shredded floral arrangements, eager to escape the disaster before they ended up in handcuffs. "Man," Officer Daniel said with a heavy sigh, "you're lucky he's not pressing charges for trespassing yet." Pamela turned a fascinating shade of greenish gray and leaned in just enough for her to hear. "Don't worry, Pam. I'm feeling generous today. Might change my mind if I see another limo parked on my tomatoes, though." Pamela stumbled back, visibly shaking, her clipboard clutched like a lifeline. The officers gave me a polite nod before heading back to their cruiser, probably eager to never ever take another HOA call again. As their taillights disappeared down the driveway, I crossed my arms, surveying the wreck. The ruined wedding, the fleeing guests, the bride sobbing into a goat-shoed veil, Pamela standing alone in the ruins of her grand plan, and somehow I had a feeling she wasn't done yet. The wedding wreckage hadn't even been fully cleaned up when the next storm hit. 2 mornings later, I was sitting on my porch with a cup of black coffee when Ray came barreling up the driveway on his four-wheeler. "Boss," he said, half laughing, half wheezing, "you got visitors again." I raised an eyebrow. "More wedding guests?" He snorted. "Worse, city inspectors." Sure enough, a white pickup bearing the official town seal rumbled to a stop near the fence. 2 men in button-down shirts and clipboards hopped out, surveying my land like it was a crime scene, and standing smugly beside them, arms folded across her chest like she was queen of the universe, Pamela Griggs. I set my coffee down with a sigh. "Here we go." I sauntered over, keeping my hands loose and easy at my sides. "Morning, gentlemen," I drawled. "What can I do for you?" The older inspector, a wiry guy with thick glasses, gave me a polite nod. "Mr. Cole, we've received several complaints about your property. Allegations of zoning violations, unsafe conditions, nuisance animals." I echoed, biting back a grin. "You mean my cows?" Pamela piped up sweetly. "And the goose? Don't forget the vicious goose." The younger inspector looked confused. "A goose?" Pamela nodded vehemently. "It bit someone. It's a danger to the community. I nearly lost it right there. Sergeant Honkers, sensing drama, waddled up behind me and let out a honk so loud it startled the younger inspector into dropping his clipboard. I patted the goose's head. He's territorial, I said. And last I checked, trespassing still wasn't legal. The inspector shuffled awkwardly. Well, ma'am, the older one said, turning to Pamela, farm animals on a working farm aren't typically considered violations. Pamela's smile faltered. But the noise, the smell, the chaos. It's a farm, I reminded her, deadpan. You know, with animals, dirt, smells, real radical concept. The younger inspector fought a smirk. The older one cleared his throat. Regardless, we'll need to do a full walkthrough. Be my guest, I said, waving toward the pasture. Watch your step, though. The goats are extra playful today. Pamela stalked behind them as they toured my land, pointing at random things with increasing desperation. The water troughs, the hay bales, the barn itself. At one point, she even tried to argue that my mailbox was an unauthorized structure. The inspectors took notes, nodded a lot, asked a few routine questions, but the longer the inspection dragged on, the more Pamela's confidence wilted like a daisy in a drought. Finally, they returned to the driveway, flipping through their forms. The older inspector looked at me and smiled tightly. Mr. Cole, everything appears to be fully compliant. No violations, no citations. I nodded politely. Appreciate your time, gentlemen. Pamela's jaw dropped open like a broken hinge. But he's, she stammered. He ruined a wedding. The younger inspector tilted his head. And how is that a zoning issue, ma'am? Pamela sputtered, flailed, and finally fell silent, her face turning an impressive shade of purple. The inspectors packed up and drove away, leaving her standing in a cloud of dust. I leaned one elbow on the fence, smiling lazily. Hey, Pam, I called after her. Maybe next time you check the law before you steal someone else's land. Pamela didn't answer. She was too busy storming toward her car, muttering curses under her breath. But something in her gait, something in the tight, hunched way she gripped her keys told me she knew she was losing. And I had a feeling the HOA wasn't going to stand by her much longer. Word travels fast in Crescent Ridge. Especially when it's juicy. By the time Friday night rolled around, every resident within a 5-block radius knew about Pamela Grigg's rustic wedding massacre, complete with farm animals, police intervention, and a very angry bride whose designer dress now smelled faintly of goat pee, which was why the HOA clubhouse was packed tighter than a cattle chute for the emergency meeting. I wasn't technically supposed to be there. After all, I wasn't a dues-paying member of the HOA, never had been, never would be. But something told me this was one show I couldn't miss. I strolled into the back of the room. Just as the meeting was called to order, Pamela sat at the head table, her hair slicked back into a severe bun, makeup layered on like armor. She gripped her clipboard so hard I half expected it to snap in half. The president of the HOA board, old Mr. Cartwright, a man who usually spent more time yelling at squirrels than handling politics, stood up and cleared his throat. All right, folks, he said. Let's get to the elephant in the room. A few people coughed. Someone snickered. Pamela forced a smile that looked more like a grimace. Before we jump to conclusions, she said quickly, I think we need to remember all the good Crescent Ridge has achieved under my leadership, increased property values, stricter aesthetic standards, our wonderful seasonal events. Wonderful? Interrupted Mrs. Beckman, an elderly woman with a cane sharper than her tongue. You fined me $200, 0 cents for having a pink flamingo in my garden. But plashed with a community aesthetic, Pamela snapped. The room erupted in low murmurs and not so quiet grumbling. Cartwright banged a gavel. Enough! We're here tonight because several residents raised serious concerns about misuse of funds, abuse of power, and, he added pointedly, unauthorized use of private property. Pamela's face twitched. That's ridiculous. I was promoting community spirit. Another hand shot up. Mr. Liu, a quiet accountant who rarely spoke. You stole money from the HOA account to rent equipment for a wedding you had no legal permission to host? Pamela's face flushed red. And, Mrs. Beckman added gleefully, you told us Mason had agreed to it. Gasps rippled through the room. Pamela stumbled over her words. Well, I assumed he would. I mean, it was for the greater good. The murmurs grew louder, angry. Greater good doesn't mean theft, Mr. Cartwright said sharply, and it sure doesn't mean dragging the HOA into lawsuits. Pamela's eyes darted around the room, desperate for allies. But every familiar face she looked to, all those she had lorded over for years, suddenly refused to meet her gaze. Even her right-hand man, Jerry Thomas, was staring down at his shoes like he wished he were somewhere else. Too, Jerry? Seeing the tide turning against her, Pamela tried one last gambit. If you remove me, she said, voice quivering, the HOA will fall apart. I've dedicated my life to this community. Someone in the back muttered, yeah, maybe we want it to. Another louder voice shouted, let's vote. Cartwright nodded grimly. Very well, all in favor of removing Pamela Griggs as HOA president, raise your hand. It was like a tidal wave. Hands shot up across the room. Men, women, retirees, young couples, even that weird teenager who mowed lawns for extra cash. Pamela stared, mouth open in horror. Only two people kept their hands down, Jerry and a confused elderly man who probably thought he was voting on free donuts. Cartwright banged the gavel again. Motion passed, effective immediately. Pamela shot to her feet, knocking her chair over with a clatter. You can't do this, she shrieked. I built this HOA. I made this neighborhood what it is. You made it miserable, Mrs. Beckman snapped back. And you made a fool of yourself, Mr. Liu added quietly. Pamela's face twisted into something ugly, pure hatred. And for a moment, I thought she might actually start throwing punches. Instead, she grabbed her clipboard, her beloved battered clipboard, and stormed out of the room without another word. The heavy clubhouse doors slammed behind her like a judge banging down a final verdict. Silence hung for a beat, then a slow, scattered applause started. It grew, hesitantly at first, then louder, until the whole room erupted into cheers and claps. I leaned back against the wall, arms folded, and allowed myself a slow, satisfied smile. Justice, as it turned out, wasn't just satisfying, it was downright beautiful. A week after the great wedding apocalypse and the great HOA coup, the neighborhood finally started feeling normal again. Kids rode their bikes without being chased down for helmet inspections. Garden gnomes mysteriously reappeared in front yards. Someone even parked a bright yellow VW Bug right in front of the clubhouse, a move that would have given Pamela herself on sight. As for Pamela herself, last I heard she was busy dodging angry phone calls from the wedding party's lawyers. Turns out, Madison's daddy, the big real estate mogul, wasn't too thrilled about shelling out 6 figures for a wedding that ended in cow pies and lawsuits. Apparently, when you lie about renting someone else's land, pocket the money, and humiliate a powerful family in front of 100 people, well, it tends to come back around. Hard. One sunny afternoon, I was stacking hay in the barn when a shiny black SUV pulled up the driveway. Out stepped Madison, looking a little less like a bridezilla and a little more like someone who'd just survived a war zone. She approached cautiously, holding a white envelope. Mr. Cole, she said, twisting the envelope in her hands, I just wanted to say, I'm sorry about all of it. I wiped my hands on my jeans. You weren't the one who lied. She gave a small, embarrassed laugh. Yeah, well, I still feel awful. I had no idea Pamela didn't have permission, and my dad insisted we make it right. She handed me the envelope. Inside was a check, a real one this time, made out to me for a pretty generous sum, enough to reseed the pasture, repair the fencing the cows trampled, and then some. I looked up at her. You sure about this? She nodded. Consider it hazard pay. I chuckled. Fair enough. Madison offered a sheepish smile and then climbed back into her SUV and drove off, leaving a trail of faith in humanity behind her. I folded the check carefully and slipped it into my back pocket. Nearby, Sergeant Honker strutted proudly across the pasture, leading a parade of baby goats who had somehow escaped their pen again. I saluted him with a grin. Good work, soldier. As I headed back toward the house, I paused, glancing toward the clubhouse down the road. With Pamela gone, the HOA was scrambling to find new leadership. There were whispers about big changes, more community events, fewer ridiculous fines, actual transparency. Of course, this was Crescent Ridge, which meant it was only a matter of time before the next Karen rose from the ashes, clipboard in hand, ready to declare herself queen of suburbia. I took a sip of my cold, sweet tea and smirked to myself. whatever happened next, me, General Snort, and Sergeant Honkers would be ready. Life settled back into its familiar dusty rhythm after the Great Crescent Ridge Showdown. The cows went back to grazing, the goats returned to climbing on everything they weren't supposed to. Captain Cluckles resumed his reign of terror over unsuspecting delivery drivers. And Sergeant Honkers, well, he strutted through the pasture every morning like a decorated war hero. And honestly, he deserved it. One evening, as I sat on my porch watching the sunset paint the sky in streaks of gold and purple, I thought about everything that had happened. It would have been easy to get bitter. Pamela had lied, cheated, and tried to bulldoze over everyone just because she thought she could. She believed her clipboard gave her the right to rule. But in the end, it wasn't some grand legal battle or a screaming match that brought her down. It was a simple fact that you can only push people so far before they push back. A little honesty, a little respect, those things go a lot further than bullying ever will. And sometimes, all it takes is a stubborn farmer, a couple dozen mischievous goats, and one very angry goose to remind a whole community that real power doesn't come from titles or rules or clipboards. It comes from standing your ground when it matters. It comes from saying enough is enough, even if you have to say it with a bull charging the buffet table. As I finished my sweet tea, I chuckled to myself, thinking about how absolutely sideways everything had gone, and how somehow it had all worked out better than I ever could have planned. Pamela had lost her throne, the neighborhood had found its voice again. And me, well, I had a check in my pocket, a farm full of happy animals, and a brand new reputation of the man who survived and won a full-scale HOA invasion. Not bad for a quiet little life, huh? The porch light flickered on as the evening deepened, casting a soft glow over the fields. Somewhere out there I knew trouble was probably already brewing again. Maybe another wannabe dictator would rise. Maybe Crescent Ridge would go back to its old HOA nonsense. But that was a battle for another day. I leaned back in my chair, tipped my hat low, and smiled, because whatever crazy scheme they threw at me next, me and Sergeant Honkers would be ready. Sometimes life throws a full-blown circus into your backyard. Cows, chaos, and all. And you've got two choices: lose your mind or own the moment. This story wasn't just about crazy weddings or clipboard-wielding Karens. It was about standing your ground, fighting back with smarts, and maybe a goose, and remembering you don't have to play by someone else's made-up rules. In a world full of bullies trying to own their way into your life, own your land, own your voice, own your story, because no one else gets to write it for you. Thanks for hanging out with me today. Seriously, you're awesome. If you enjoyed this ride, smash that like button, drop a comment telling me your favorite part, and subscribe for more real-world karma stories you won't believe. Trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next.